All right. We have everything. Oh, no, this. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. Very nice introduction. On April 9, 1731, a merchant ship, Rebecca, was sailing towards England, north of Havana. And it was boarded by a privateer ship. A privateer ship is essentially a hired people by other country to do their dirty work. And so what they were doing, this privateer ship, what they were doing is looking for contraband. So they boarded the ship, the Rebecca, looking for contraband. They didn't find it. And so the captain was really rather angry that they didn't find any. And so he sliced off the left ear of the captain of the ship, Jenkins, and handed it to him. So anyway, upon they continued their ship, the tour to England, and Jenkins, of course, lodged a complaint with the authorities and also with Parliament. And the Parliament was really all ears about his complaint. This is not working now. Let's try this. All right. That is Prime Minister Walpole. He doesn't seem to want anything to do with that piece of appendage. And so even though the Parliament was all interested in this, they were a little bit revolted there about this. But they did lodge a complaint with Spain, but really nothing much happened thereafter regarding the complaint. But other things started happening there. The other things are, Spanish. As the Spanish learned of the enormity of British contraband, there were many more Spanish attacks on British ships from 31 on. Spain severely limited Britain to do commerce in Spanish territory. They didn't want the Britons in there. The British colony of Georgia was founded on February the 2nd, 1733, encroaching in Spanish territory. Well, you might remember that Hernando de Soto, he visited the Southeast United States in 1539 to 1543, and he went all the way up to what today is North Carolina. So it's the Spanish, they claimed all that land. For them, Florida was all the land all the way up to North Carolina. So when the British founded the Georgia, then they complained that this was Spanish territory. And so they were bickering, and they started to negotiate some sort of a solution, but unfortunately negotiations failed in mid 1739. Now, in the heat of parliamentary discussions about what to do about this, the matter of the Jenkins Ear came up again. And so eventually they decided that using the Jenkins Ear affair as a justification. And on July 10, 1739, Parliament authorized the Admiralty to begin naval operations against the Spanish Caribbean possessions. This is why it is called the War of Jenkins Ear. The objectives of this attack were to stop Spanish attacks on British ships, and then they allow them to do a little more contraband, perhaps, or maybe even better, to get some sort of an agreement to allow them to do this. Another objective was to take control of the Caribbean. Now, these are big words. and of course to have access to Latin American markets. So this war was really about commercial rights. The British wanted commercial rights in Latin America. But this business about taking control of the Caribbean, that's not so easy. They had to take something big. They had to take either Havana over here, or excuse me, or Veracruz over here, or Cartagena, or Panama City over here, in order to encroach the Spanish power in Latin America. The war was actually formally declared in October 19, 1731. So there was officially a war going on between the two. So it took some time to get the troops together for this big engagement because it had to be an amphibious engagement. So they had to have a huge navy and they had to have land troops as well. So it has to be a huge army as well. So this amphibious effort really was a big thing, and it took them a while to get it together. In the meantime, Vice Admiral Vernon, he attacked some of the ports like La Guaira over here, Cartagena over there, Portobelo over here, just to test the waters more or less of what was going to come. And so the British Armada was only ready to go about December of 1740. Now, since this was an amphibious expedition, the decision was made to divide the commands into two. The Navy and the Marines would be commanded by Vice Admiral Edward Vernon, and the Army by General Thomas Wentworth. Now notice that this means that the command structure required consensus, as there was no sole chief. They had to agree. And this was a tragic mistake. It was a mistake that the British had done before, because in 1655, there was an attempt by the British to conquer what is today Dominican Republic. They wanted to take the city, Santo Domingo, and they sent an amphibious group of 54 ships and land troops to Santo Domingo to take it over. But they had the same structure, that the Navy was managed by, commanded by, in this case, William Penn, and the Army was commanded by General Venables. And they had to agree, but they didn't. And so, mainly because of that, the whole adventure to take Santo Domingo failed, and failed badly. And so, as a consolation prize, the British Navy and the troops actually took over Jamaica in 1655. And that was it. That was what they could do with this structure, the command structure. So this was a very bad idea. So in December of 1730, the military expedition left England. It had 172 ships and about 30,000 men, and it was the largest English military initiative ever. It was larger than the Spanish Armada of 1588, which consisted of 154 ships and 30,000 men. The Great Britain at that time didn't have sufficient recruitable Marines in their territory, so they completed the recruiting with 4,000 men from the American colonies. Now, the American colonies, they agreed to do this. They really wanted to participate in this because they themselves were suffering from the attacks of the British, from the Spanish privateers. And so this would be a way for them to be able to do more commerce with the Caribbean. And so also the people who were going to go, they were going to get a salary, they were going to get a part of the booty and all that. So this seemed to be a reasonable thing to do. And Lawrence Washington, son of a wealthy planter from North Virginia, was one of the military men who volunteered and went to this war. Of course, Lawrence Washington was the older brother of George Washington. And so this is why he ended up in the Caribbean. The American colonial companies started arriving in October. So this is way before the rest of the Armada arrived. And, they didn't do too well because on the way over, they had a rough trip. They got sick, they didn't eat well. And finally, when they reached Jamaica, they went to town and they got drunk. And then the following day, they went to town again and got drunk again. And it went on like that until Vernon said, no, stop it, this is enough. You're not allowed to leave the ship. So, that went well with the American colonies. And furthermore, there was sort of a misunderstanding because the American colonies thought that they would give pay to these people up to the moment when they arrived in Jamaica, because they were going to be incorporated into the English forces. Well, the English thought differently, and they would not incorporate them until they were ready. So there was a hiatus there for a couple of months when these American colonies had no income. And so, the food ran out. And so they had no chance to go to bars, no food. They got sick. They could not leave their ships. So there was really a bunch of very unhappy people. So the full expedition force was finally put together in Jamaica in January 8th, 1741. That's when the British ships arrived. And the Americans were then incorporated into the British force. They were paid, they were given food, uniforms, and training. And now this sort of exacerbated the problems that they already had because things were not as they thought. You see, they thought that the American troops would be a coherent group of people, of American colonists led by American colonist officers, and that was not the way it happened. What was done is that they were dispersed in the rest of the troops from England, and this didn't go very well because they did not respect the officers, the British officers. They had this idea somehow that the American officers, they gained respect, they earned the respect, and they felt that the British officers, they felt that they just earned it because of family connections or other types of connections. So there was a misunderstanding there, misconception certainly. So they were not really very, very happy. So the leadership then got together to decide how are they going to start this whole venture. And they, of course, they decided to do it to attack Cartagena. Why Cartagena? Well, the other cities were farther away. La Habana had never been taken, and Cartagena had been taken about 50 years before by a privateer. And so they thought that that would be a good way, a good place to start. And so that's what they did. They went to sail to Cartagena, and they arrived in March the 5th. And the Spanish had expected Havana to be the British target, so part of the Cartagena troops had been sent to defend Havana. And so they arrived on the 5th, and the attack started on March 9th. Now, the dates here are going to be important for what I'm going to tell you. So mark the March 8th date, March 9th. So this is Cartagena. This is the city of Cartagena. And it was defended by this man, Don Blas de Leso, who had 2,400 troops with him. Now, this person, he had, cannot say it too well, but he had only one eye. He had one arm and one leg. And so the British thought that, he was sort of half a man, something like that. And they sort of projected that kind of weakness onto the defense of Spain. So they were really very chipper how easy it was going to be to take Cartagena. So the plan was, they could not attack directly. So the plan was to go into the bay and land troops over here. Those troops will go and set up camp about here. They will attack this fort, Fort San Lazarus. And once the fort fell, then they would take over the city. Of course, in order to go into the bay, they had to get rid of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 forts. And then they had to take care of 6 ships because the Spanish had 6 warships. And finally, they had to take care of these 2 other forts, before they could land people there. So the attack started, and very quickly they got rid of this fort and this one and this one, and they were able to land 4,000 troops on Tierra de Bomba. That's the name of this place, Tierra Bomba. 4,000 troops who set up camp. Among the troops were about 500 American colonists. Now, when they set up the camp, the American colonists were given the worst jobs. They were, to cut trees, to cut wood, to dig for latrine holes, to wash clothes, this sort of thing. And so they were a very unhappy group. But anyway, so there were 4,000 plus people here, and they were being attacked from this fort and this one and this one, and the ships who were here. They were bombarded. And so it took them a certain amount of time to get everything ready. Ready to what? Well, ready to take this fort, which was a very strong fort. This was relatively strong, and this was very weak. So it took them about 2 weeks to finally be able to attack that fort. And they actually took it. They destroyed the fort completely with bombardment. So it was actually 2 weeks later, after they landed here, it took them 2 weeks to finally take this final fort. These 2 were also taken. And on the 26th of March did I say? 26th, they were able to go into the bay. Only then. 2 weeks. So the Spanish actually, they put up a hell of a fight. They really did. I mean, they damaged quite a few ships. I'm sorry, I'm looking for something here. So they damaged 11 warships, ships on the line. out of 54. That's pretty heavy damage. But anyway, they finally were able to escape. The remnants of this fort, the people who were left, they escaped and went to the city, to Cartagena. The Spanish decided to scuttle all 6 ships. They scuttled them into this bay. They also abandoned these 2 forts. So the English were ready now to disembark, to get the troops over here and the other bellic material and continue with their plan. At this point, Vice Admiral Vernon wrote to London that he had successfully taken Cartagena. And well, England rejoiced. They had parties, they had marches, they had, they even they had commemorative coins. Now, the first one, it says the Spanish pride pulled down by Admiral Vernon. And the other one says, true British heroes took Cartagena. They minted these commemorative coins in England. Unfortunately, a bit prematurely, as it turns out, because some very, very bad things started to happen. See, Tierra Bomba was thick with Aedes aegypti, the mosquito carrier of yellow fever, and other diseases. And furthermore, it was summer, well, it was hot, and the constant feuding of Vernon and the general was such that they just could not get things done. For example, Vernon had fresh vegetables, but he would not share them with the army. And so the army got dysentery, they got dehydration, so they got not only the disease of yellow fever, but they got all other sorts of diseases. So the troops that waited here for 2 weeks, they became very sick. A lot of them, thousands of them became sick, and they started dying because yellow fever is that kind of a disease. They started dying. But anyway, so with fresh troops and whatnot, they came and they landed. I'm sorry. What did I do? Oh, yeah. So they landed here. It took him 11 days to land. So even more people got sick. So they landed here with 4,500 troops, fresh ones, and they went over and set up camp over here. But you see, this area is also thick with the mosquito. And so the people who went there, they started getting sick as well. So much so that by the time that they were ready to attack Fort St. Lazarus, half of the new group of troops was already sick. And so the attack was not with 4,000 troops, or 4,400, but it was only with 2,000. They finally decided to attack. But it was a weak force, a much weaker force. And not only that, but it was badly planned. It was badly led. It was a terrible, terrible attack. For example, they were supposed to attack at night for surprise. And they were late. And by the time they got there, it was sun up. So they lost the surprise. They were supposed to bombard the fort, but they didn't. And they just went ahead and attacked directly with the soldiers. They took siege ladders with them, but when they tried to use them, they turned out to be short. So this kind of thing. So the attack here, and this is the fort. This is a hell of a fort. I've been there. And some of the walls are 25 foot thick. So even if they could bombard it, it would be, good luck with that. It would have been rather difficult to destroy or to breach that fort. In any case, the point is that it was a miserable failure. And of the 2,000 troops, 1/3 of them died in the battle because they were easy to shoot. They were just there coming up towards the Spanish, easy to shoot. They, of course, got sick too. There were 2/3 of them were wounded. So it was a major, major disaster. So much so that when they found the British finally got together again, they decided that they could really not do it. They could not take Cartagena at all. So they packed up and left. They went back to Jamaica. In 47 days of fighting, attack failed. Huge losses, 10 to 11,000 dead. Most of these from disease, but many of them from battles as well. 8,000 wounded, 50 ships lost. So it was a major, major problem, but more than that, it was sort of a loss for the face because Vernon was defeated. Vernon's 186 ships were defeated by an admiral, Spanish admiral, who had only one eye and one leg and one foot, one arm, and only 6 ships. So it was terrible. So anyway, so they went back, returned to Jamaica to heal, rest, and replenish their losses. They asked for more people to join them from England and from the colonies. And this, of course, took a long, long time. And then they tried to decide, okay, what are we going to do now? So they decided, okay, let's take Santiago de Cuba, which is not so difficult to take. Now, Santiago de Cuba is sort of relatively close to Kingston. Actually, this is the map that they had. So Santiago de Cuba is here. And in order to get through there with the ships, you have to go through this strait, which was actually a gauntlet because there were cannons on both sides. And they would have been badly damaged if they didn't went through. So Vernon, he said he was not going to risk his navy on that, and that the attack should be by land. And he convinced Wentworth that the attack by land would have been easy. There were only 1,000 people defending Santiago de Cuba, after all. And so Wentworth, they bought the idea. He bought it. He said, fine, okay, let's do it. So they landed 4,000 troops in Guantanamo, and they set up camp. And so in planning the land attack, Wentworth was finally realized that, wait a minute, this is 70 miles here, and we don't have beasts of burden. We don't have animals who carry stuff. We don't have carts. We have to ford 5 rivers, and some of them big. And this is not going to work just that easily. It's not that easy, no. So he tried to convince Vernon that it should be an amphibious attack. So he would attack with the ships, and then somehow with a smaller number of troops, he would go behind and to Santiago de Cuba and take it from both sides. They would take it. And Vernon said, no way. I'm not going to go through that gauntlet. No. So, well, you have to do it because we cannot go from here to here. We have no animals. We have no cars. We can't do it. Yes, no, yes, no. 4 months in that yes and no thing. 4 months until what happened? Well, rains started to come. This was September, October, maybe a hurricane or two. And the mosquitoes, well, there were mosquitoes here as well. So the 4,000 troops that were placed there, they started to get very sick too, and they started to die. And so finally, after all that, they decided that they just couldn't do it. So they packed up and left. And they went back to Jamaica. Well, what do we do now? What do we do now? Well, we got to do something. All right, so they decided that, no, they're going to capture Panama City. Now, Panama City is a big city. Would have been a nice thing to be able to do that. But they were going to do it by capturing Portobello, which was on the Caribbean side. Panama City is on the Pacific side. So they were going to capture Portobello. And then from there, they were going to attack, in a surprise attack, they were going to attack Panama City and take it. Portobello had only 380 defenders. No, we had, what, 2,400 in Cartagena. We had 1,000 in Santiago de Cuba, 380. That should be doable. Not only that, but 2 years before, Vernon had taken Portobello. He took it for a couple of days, just as the testing of the waters, as I said, and and then he left. So, all right, so let's do that. That sounds like a good idea. Now, the plan that they devised required much secrecy. The element of surprise was crucial. And the plan was this. They were going to leave a group of soldiers here to take the bellic material, cannons and other things, down by the river, or up the river, all the way to Las Cruces. Also, then they were going to go all the way to Nombre de Dios and leave 500 troops there at night, of course, everything at night. These 500 troops would take Nombre de Dios and would walk down and intercept the route from Portobello to Panama City. And they would not allow anybody to get through. From Nombre de Dios, in very stealthy manner, at night, the ships would enter Portobello, would take Portobello, and voila, you know, they would then go, or the whole group, the army, the big force, all of them, they joined this other force here. Together, they would go down, they would meet at Las Cruces, and from here, they would go and take Panama City. Cinch. Well, oh, by the way, that's yours truly in Portobello. That is the Portobello Bay. Now, instead of the surprise attack that the plan called for, with the previous landing in Nombre de Dios, Vernon decided to take advantage of the fantastically favorable winds that day. And exhilarated, he sailed right into the bay during the day with the full squadron. He just loved it. Yay! Well, the Portobello defenders, of course, escaped and raised alarm in Panama City. One officer dared to not confront, but to ask Vernon, what the hell happened? And he was reviled, quote, in a very ungentlemanly manner, unquote. And so that was that. So expecting Spanish attacks from Panama City, with the yellow fever not slacking, they decided to return to Jamaica without even disembarking the troops. They went back to Jamaica. So what now? We got to do something, anything, to save the expedition. So they had this idea. They decided to occupy the island of Roatan off the coast of Honduras with a small force. Now, there was nobody in Roatan. It was uninhabited. So that would be easy. There is Roatan off the coast of Honduras. That is the island. Today is a paradise, by the way, vacations paradise. It's lots of coral and lots of sailing and so on. So maybe some of you guys have been there in Roatan. It's a good vacation spot, but back then it was empty. So Vernon insisted that the force must be made up of colonials. I mean, after all, they were settlers. They were the right ones to go there. Now, the colonials were not interested. They didn't want to go. They wanted to go home. But they were forced to go. 233 colonials and 50 Britons to keep an eye on them. They were taken to Roatan. As predicted by Wentworth, the colonials marooned Roatan. They rebelled, they were subdued, and eventually, in a couple of years, it took a couple of years really, but they all left the island. So the island became uninhabited again. The entire expedition officially ended on August 5, 1742. Now, this is the expedition. The War of Jenkins Ear, as it is known, is supposed to have lasted until 1748. But the expedition in the Caribbean ended in 42, and that was it. The results, dismal. Total dead about 15,000 people. Of the 4,000 colonials, only 300 returned. 54 ships were lost. It was really awful. The aftermath, well, Prime Minister Walpole resigned. Vernon and Wentworth were recalled and, well, eventually were exonerated. The government really didn't want to make a big deal out of this. They were, in good measure, at fault as well. And not only that, but there was another war to take care of right then. Vernon has admirers, quite popular. Today, he lays in Westminster. We went, Judy and I went there, and we saw his tomb in Westminster. Wentworth is not there. The odd War of Jenkins Ear had merged into this new war, the Austrian succession, which became a very big deal, a very big war, because most of the European countries participated in this war, even Sweden was part of this war. So some historians have actually called it World War Zero. So they really had their attention on something else. And Captain Jenkins and his missing appendage, well, they were forgotten, slowly forgotten. And Lawrence Washington returned, became adjutant to Virginia's militia. He settled the Huntington Creek property and renamed it Mount Vernon in honor of the admiral. So when you go there, remember that. Why is it called Mount Vernon? Because of the admiral. Well, it is said that this probably contributed to the new sense of Americanism. We are different from the British. We're different. We don't want much to do with it. And possibly it left the seed of the colonials' resentment of the British, and most probably was a contributing factor to American independence. And with that, thank you. By the way, that book is the main source of my presentation.
You had spoken at the beginning of your presentation about privateers were raiding British ships for contraband. What was the contraband and why was that important?
Well, the Spanish were very protected, and they didn't want any commerce done by other countries. In fact, cities in Spanish possessions were not allowed to do commerce with other cities in the same continent. So that's how protected they were. The British wanted to buy tobacco, they wanted to buy sugar, they wanted to buy things like that, and take it to England. I think that by then sugar was an important item, and so they couldn't do it. They would have to just do it on contraband, that's why. And so they hire these privateer ships. They're really pirates on the hire by the country, by the crowns. Am I answering your question?
Yes. Just to make a couple of comments. Some of these American colonies, as you mentioned, were incorporated, but some were taken by force. They were forced into the British army. There's a term used in those days, how they were picked up on the street, dragged into the ships, and they served forced labor sometimes. So
Shanghai?
Yes, that's it. The other thing is, if you go to Madrid, the Naval Museum in Madrid, the biggest display is the Battle of Cartagena. That's the opposite of the Spanish Armada. I said, look what we did to them, and they're very proud of that. It's a huge display at the Naval Museum. And last but not least, all these constant attacks that failed reminds me a little bit of Monty Python. Then you have the guy with one leg and one arm.
That was one of the most enjoyable talks I've heard. I really enjoyed that. I knew nothing about it. And, I don't know how much more I do, but I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
There was I just looked this up because I remembered it from my days at school, learning about the War of Jenkins Ear, but I remember this nursery rhyme that was, at the time, that was sung in the streets by school children when the war was declared, and I've forgotten the actual rhyme, so I looked it up, and here it is. Our merchants and ears a strange brother have made, with losses sustained in their ships and their trade. But now they may laugh and quite banish their fears, nor mourn for lost liberty, riches, or ears. That was an English street ballad of 1739. The children used to skip ropes.
When I looked up this battle, this war, it talked about battles that took place in northern Florida. Do you know anything about that, or was that just somebody spoofing us on the internet?
Well, I don't know about that. And the reason is this, that I stopped in 1742. The War of Jenkins Ear officially, as War of Jenkins Ear went on all the way to 48. And there were some skirmishes in that Georgia area because the Spanish did not recognize the colony of Georgia. That was Spanish land. I don't know the details of that.
Yes, yesterday I read an article, and it so happens that the HMS Tiger, a British warship, ran aground in the Dry Tortugas off the coast of Florida in 1742, they said, during the War of Jenkins Ear. So obviously it was patrolling the Spanish territory of Florida and maybe down to Cuba and all too. But they were able to confirm that this is definitely the HMS Tiger, British warship. Interesting.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you very much. It's said that this is the greatest naval disaster of the British fleet in history, because all told, in the entire war, they lost over 400 ships and 20,000 men. But in Georgia, when Georgia was established, the Spaniards saw it as a threat, and the Brits attacked St. Augustine and failed, and then the Spaniards attacked Georgia and were defeated in 2 battles, and apparently in the last weekend of May each year, Georgians celebrate the War of Jenkins Ear.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Are there any other questions? Just one. the story that we were told today is another example on how diseases have affected the history and wars. More often in the past, casualties were due to diseases and not to the engagement in battle. And that happened in many, many instances, including the Napoleonic Wars. So this is an interesting example of that.
Sometimes I can't see your hands, and I'm sorry.
Keith, I too very much enjoyed your narration of the events and found it instructional and very entertaining. Your personality is very, very instructive and entertaining. Just a question of curiosity. With so much animosity that existed between the Spaniards and the English, and the premise for the war was that the British would then be enabled to do trade in Latin America. And yet then there would be contraband interdiction on the high seas by the privateers who were basically mercenaries of Spain. So was it just a surreptitious trade where the British would come in to Latin America, trade, and then load their ships and then get ambushed on the way back? I mean, so it was almost like they were led into a trap.
Well, I think that the British, what they really wanted was the rights to do commerce with these big cities, like Cartagena, La Guaira, and so on. And so by taking one of the cities or two of their cities, they would just make a statement that we have to negotiate, we have to do something, you have to allow us to do this, to do more commerce. I think that was what they were aiming at. And well, I don't know about the ambush idea. I don't know if the Spanish did not really, I don't think that they had a plan to counter them except to defend themselves. That's all I think.
I think the whole thing was part of the Spanish Empire, and the Spanish will defend their colony, particularly the commerce. They were not allowed the British to come in, wars, privateers. The British invaded Argentina in 1806 and 1807. Again, the reason was they wanted open commerce, and the Spanish were not allowed that. Yes.
I've got a question, I don't know whether you can answer because I don't know the answer. How much did the actual war cost the British Treasury? I mean, those hundreds of ships must have almost bankrupted the country to build them. Also, the impressing of men, not just, of course, in the colonies, but also in the UK, because nobody wanted to join the Navy. And then the other question I have is that, which might have had some impact on the reason to kind of postpone the whole invasion, was that only a few years later, in 1745, there was a rebellion from Scotland against England, against the Act of Union between which we now know as the United Kingdom, and the return to power of the Scottish pretender, Bonnie Prince Charlie, and those troubles, which cost a fortune too. So I think people at home in England would have not been very happy with the cost, not only to the Treasury, but the cost to them in terms of loss of life. Do you know anything about the actual cost? Is it mentioned in the book as to how much it cost to actually conduct the war?
I don't remember any figures. Obviously, the number of ships that were lost was enormous. And some of the ships, by the way, were lost not because they were sunk or destroyed, because they were abandoned. There just were not enough people to man them. And so they had to be left where it was. So I don't have an answer for that. Obviously, it cost an enormous amount of money. But then somehow they survived it and immediately went into the next war, which was the Austrian succession. I mean, it was sort of a fluid war and then already in the next war. So they must have had the money. Britain was a very rich country back then. And I think that they might have been able to absorb the enormity of this, the cost of this.
So, Steve, I think you talked about the Spanish privateers, and I wasn't aware of that because I thought the British had that locked. When we think of privateers, I think of Henry Morgan, who was one of the privateers. It was earlier, I think, 1640 something, when he used to raid the Spanish ships. So it seemed almost like payback with the Spanish having their privateers raid the British ships.
Every country had privateers. France had it, Spain had it, England had it, even the Netherlands had it. And so they were pirates for hire. It was easy, it was cheaper perhaps for them in terms of their own personnel, their own human life, to hire these people. So yes, they all engaged in it. They all thought that it was a great idea. And it was, I guess.
My understanding was the South Sea Company, and it was the burgeoning conception of mercantilism being essential for British, wealth, et cetera, that pushed for the war. And because I think the Spaniards call it the Guerra de los Asientos, because the British were limited to 100,000, equivalent of 100,000 pounds of trade with any Latin American country. And the Spaniards had the right to board any English ship, or any ship, to see if they were carrying contraband. And the Jenkins ship had sugar, illegal sugar, which was confiscated. So part of it was the opposition to Walpole, who didn't really want to get into the war and was kind of blamed for its failure because he wasn't really behind it. And so there was a sort of internal British political push. The South Sea Company that disappeared after the war, but let's not forget the East India Company basically caused Britain to rule India, to take it over, to have its own private army. So people forget all the dynamics.
Well, there's so much detail in his words. You're right about Walpole. He was not all that hot on the war, and he paid for it and had to resign at the end. On the other hand, my understanding is that the Rebecca did not have contraband at all. And that was the reason why this guy swiped off the ear, because he didn't find any contraband. It was upset.
Any other questions? Thank you, Steve. Thank
you.
We really enjoyed it. Remember, April the 1st, we'll see you here with Lynn Shifthorse. Thank you for coming. I don't think it's started to rain yet.
Good job, Steve. Yes, enough. Thank you.